My name is Ben Rodgers and I'm a Catchment Sensitive Farming advisor working on the limestone area within the Derbyshire White Peak. For the last 5 years now, we've been working together with our local farmers, particularly the dairy farmers, looking at the role of herbal leys or multi-species swards within their farming systems. So for the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about some of our experiences to date, have a little bit of a look at the background to the White Peak trials and why we started thinking about diverse swards, talk a bit about the benefits of diversity with a focus on the sort of resilient side of things. We'll see how they've been performing for us locally in our local conditions so far. Talk a bit about establishment, some of the lessons we've learned around that. I'll put forward a whole farm system, at least for our area in the White Peak, just as an example of what this might look like. I'm also going to touch on the Environmental Land Management Scheme payments as well in England through SFI, Countryside Stewardship, and how you might think about implementing those. So for those of you who are less familiar with CSF, we're a partnership between Natural England, DEFRA, EA and Forestry Commission, and we work with farmers in priority areas through England to enhance the quality of our water and air. We also have a role in flood risk mitigation, together with secondary objectives in climate change adaptation, and we work to enhance the condition of our soils and biodiversity. So we're involved with an awful lot. Just so you can understand the area I work in, the map there shows you the Derbyshire Wye Valley, because I know there are several, and that's essentially a series of steep-sided limestone dales which are triple SI, so important kind of wildlife sites. We've also got our River Wye, Derbyshire River Wye, running through the bottom of that valley, which again is a triple SI river. And then all of that land you can see in white there, all around the dale, is the higher land, so up to 1,000 feet in altitude. And it's the higher land up above the dales. We call it the White Peak Plateau, and that tends to be dominated by some very productive farmland. In the main, perennial ryegrass receiving bagged nitrogen slurry for dairy production. So there's quite a few environmental pressures on these dales. You've got the thin, free-draining nature of the soils means there's quite a risk of phosphate getting down into the watercourses, into the river systems, a risk of atmospheric nitrogen deposition onto the dales as well, and quite difficult for biodiversity to move throughout that landscape in response to sort of changing climatic conditions. Coupled alongside that, also obviously a number of pressures on the farming side. So as we know, dairy farms vulnerable to fluctuations in milk price, input prices, particularly nitrogen, a lot of issues around labour availability, and also many people are faced with some big decisions around slurry storage infrastructure as well. It's also worth pointing out that although we get above 1,200 mil of annual rainfall, because we're on very thin, free-draining soils over limestone, as soon as it stops raining in a dry time, the land does sort of burn up very quickly and stops producing. So against that context, going back to 2019, post-Brexit, the environmental land management schemes were being developed, and it seemed quite a good time to start looking at the sort of things farmers might do in this landscape if the right incentives were available. So we formed a bit of an informal partnership, I guess, between our local farmers, ourselves, the National Park Authority, Severn Trent Water, who are our local water company, and we set about doing various things on the ground to try and boost biodiversity, benefit water, air and soil, and mitigate the impacts of climate change. And crucially, in doing this, we're very clear we wanted to try and find ways of delivering more resilient farming systems. So with a bit of money, we set about doing various things on the ground. So I should really explain at this point that although we sort of adopted this name White Peak Trials, they're not scientific trials. It's very much farmer engagement trial. So it's all about finding a bit of money to enable farmers to have a go at doing something on the ground that maybe they otherwise wouldn't have done. Find out what the problems are, find out what the barriers are, look for solutions, and then share those findings with everyone, which we do through our Summer Farm Walk programme. So, as has been said of legumes today, Herbal leys, bit of a win-win for farming environment. When we first started looking at what we could do in this area, they seemed quite a good thing to home in on. As we know, essentially a mix of grasses, legumes and herbs. Clearly we're interested in all of the environmental benefits, so those deep and diverse root systems, opening up that soil structure, allowing that heavy rainfall to percolate in, so flood management dimension. On the free-draining limestone, we're very interested in those roots in terms of accessing that moisture for longer into the season, particularly in a dry time. And as has been said today, you're not relying on the Haber-Bosch process for your nitrogen, so lower carbon footprint. Farming benefits, obviously you've got your grasses for your energy, for milk and meat production, legumes fixing that nitrogen for your protein. Many of the legumes and some of the herbs contain these tannins we've heard about, so the anthelmintic properties, the sort of anti-bloat properties, and many of those deep-rooting herbs, as well as providing that drought tolerance, pulling up minerals from the soil. So the .gov website very much steers people towards a good, diverse range of species in their seed mix. The reason being obvious, the more things you've got in there, all with varying characteristics and patterns of behaviour, the more resilience you have to whatever prevailing environmental conditions you have at the time. So typically we talk about a mix with at least 5 grasses, at least 3 legumes, and at least 5 herb species, just to get that diversity. So when we first started thinking about this, we went to one of the leading seed companies and we gave them a bit of a brief. We said, well, we want a seed mix that's got all this diversity in. We want to know what works on our soil, so let's test it out. But crucially, we want it to be productive for the farmers because we wanted people to have a good experience and not be put off straight away. And that mix on the, sorry, I keep looking at that screen, don't I? That's the mix they came up with. And because most of our farmers decided just to try this out on a cutting field first rather than one of their grazing fields, they kind of tailored it more towards grazing for us. So we've got obviously perennial ryegrasses in there for your production and your high sugars and so on. As Andre was saying earlier, I guess we've got some cardboard grasses in there as well. So we've got the Festulolium and the fescues with their deep roots. That was very much a nod to our local circumstances and the sort of drought resilience. Timothy, I guess covering off the slightly wetter and cooler times. Good range of legumes in there, including the sandfoin and the lucerne, which we thought would do quite well in our local context. We've just got a few herbs in there, the ones that were considered, perhaps more likely of the things available to persist in a cutting regime. So the plantain with its deep roots and protein and minerals, of course, and then some burnet and yarrow. I guess conspicuous by its absence, and I know it's been talked about, and Charlie mentioned it just now, chicory. Took the decision not to include that initially because of all the things we're aware of. We didn't want to sort of spook the horses. Lots of pluses, obviously, deep rooting, minerals, calcium, protein, the tannins even, and stock do seem to finish well on it. But as has been mentioned, it can be quite bitter, a bit of an acquired taste and lower dry matter. And classically, when it decides to put up that stem, not so much the middle photo, because that's kind of a bit more manageable, but when it gets mature, as in the right-hand side, the old thing about it having the capacity to puncture silage wrap and also sort of stem rejection as well. But increasingly, many people locally are putting this in both the grazing and the cutting mixes. So really I just wanted to kind of lead into the value of roots and the sort of resilience that gives you in a dry time. The irony is not lost on me that I'm about to be talking about sort of dry times and drought conditions and so on, given the weather we've got. However, if we cast our mind back to summer of 2022, we didn't really get a lot of rain up in the peaks after sort of May time, early May. Dry pretty much all throughout the summer, and in fact, I think it was 18th of July, hottest day ever recorded in Buxton, apparently. So this is one herbal ley that was put in by one of our local farmers, Rusty Mycock, who's actually here today. And that was direct drilled 1st of June 2022. And then that photograph was taken 4 weeks later, obviously no rain and obviously really struggling to do very much. I kind of feared the worst, I guess. Didn't really go anywhere near. Eventually, I did call by, I think it was mid-August, and quite staggered to see what you see in that photo there in the middle. So wall-to-wall cover of the deep-rooting herbs and legumes. So predominantly plantain, chicory, red clover, etc. Very little ryegrass, obvious, but if you did kind of rummage around in the base, it was there. It was almost just kind of nestling in a little microclimate in the bottom, almost like the broadleaves were acting as a kind of a nurse crop for the grasses. So as this was very much in its establishment phase and it was awaiting its first sort of light graze with the cows, we weren't really able to fully put it through its paces against the ryegrass and really sort of test what it could do in a dry time. But I feel this kind of gives you a hint at what these deep-rooting things can do in those conditions. This is another herbal ley locally that's managed for silage. It does include chicory in this mix as well. This was put in the previous year, so 2021, so that was fully established by the time we got this dry weather. And the photo on the left there was taken in mid-July, just in the run-up to second cut, and then the mown swath in the middle there is obviously at that second cut, and that actually cropped 50% more than the fertilised ryegrass did on second cut, based upon weighbridge sort of weighed trailer loads. Also, perhaps more anecdotally, we did get quite a lot of feedback from other farmers who were round baling their second cut, who said in some cases they were getting double on the herbal ley that they were on the ryegrass. Then on the far side there, you can just see that photograph was taken 10 days after on the same field. Again, no rain. You can just see how quickly it's regrowing there. So just a bit about how they perform in the dry. Productivity, a lot of our guys locally, we do have some people doing multi-cut systems, but a lot do 2 or 3 cuts as well. And from the figures I've been given, it seems that first cut silage tends to be about 20% down compared to the fertilised ryegrass, but second and third cut broadly similar. So perhaps on an annual sort of basis might be around about 10% down. But obviously you've not used the nitrogen and you've got those roots there in place, hopefully to help you out in a dry time. Rusty's actually grazing his dairy cows on herbal leys and was plate metering those last year, and we do accept that plate meters don't necessarily respond in the same way for herbal leys as ryegrass, but they're the best we've got to go on locally until people start sort of cutting and drying and weighing. And last year, it was about 20% down on the dry matter in 2023 on the herbal leys, but saving potentially upwards of 200 kilos of nitrogen to the hectare. And again, he's got those deep roots in the ground that could help out if conditions change, get a bit drier. So just try and explain that table at the far side there. So that's really an attempt to try and equate possible financial savings on nitrogen fertiliser to different levels of fertiliser application at different prices per tonne. And that's based upon, on the left-hand side, 185, that's the lowest it's been for ammonium nitrate within the last 5 years. The 870 is the highest it's been, and obviously the middle figure is where it's floating around at the moment. So just trying to sort of show that if you drop down from 200 kilos to the hectare down to 0, you could be saving over £150 a hectare on the nitrogen fertiliser. I've also built into that some additional costs for extra herbal ley seed and an extra pass with a direct drill within that sort of 6-year comparison period with a sort of a 6-year ryegrass ley. So if you then added to that saving the SFI herbal ley payment of 382, then you could be looking at figures of well over £500 a hectare. So it might be that on the one hand you're thinking, well, yeah, okay, possibly reduce dry matter yields, but then on the other hand, I could be in for some savings and a payment, and it might be that that money is enough to offset the lower dry matter yield, and depending upon where you're at with your business, you might think, well, actually, yeah, it suits me to perhaps cut back on stock numbers a bit, and particularly if that coincides with issues around labour, if you're struggling for staff, or if you've got to make some commitment to extra slurry storage infrastructure, it may suit you to kind of roll that way. Otherwise, it may be you say, well, actually, no, at least on the grazing platform, need to try and maintain that dry matter where it is as much as possible. So it comes back to this, is there a case for a strategic dose of nitrogen, particularly in that early part of the year before those legumes get going, fixing that nitrogen, just maintain that dry matter, still possibly save in the region of £100 a hectare maybe, but also you're keeping those roots in place and that resilient sward for a difficult time. So apologies for this horrendous slide and all these figures. I'll do my best just to explain this. So essentially we had another farmer who is, or who was, grazing his dairy cows on 21-day rotation on the herbal ley and on some ryegrass as well. And all we did was in 2021, at the point of grazing in June, July, and then we did a late one out of curiosity in November as well. We just dropped in and took a sample of both the herbal ley and the ryegrass, sent them off for full wet chemistry forage analysis. And I've just got to kind of make it clear that this is just based on a few samples. It's not based on lots of replicates, so it's not, mega scientifically robust. It's just a snapshot, but I think it does kind of reflect other more established data for these things. So the dry matter, if you just look across there, as you'd expect, dry matter tends to be higher for the ryegrass and the herbal ley. Herbal leys do tend to be lower in the dry matter. The ME, broadly similar, although it does take a bit of a nosedive on the herbal ley in November. I'm not 100% sure why that was. We did speculate that there was quite a lot of cocksfoot coming through, Andre smiling, at that point in the season. So whether that was responsible, possible. Crude protein, again, as you'd expect, a little bit higher on the herbal ley, although it has been pointed out those figures generally on the crude protein do look a little bit on the high side across the board. I've just pulled out on the minerals side, we didn't do a full range of mineral analysis, but for the ones we did, I've just pulled out calcium, copper and zinc as being higher in the herbal ley. I had the confidence to do that because that does tally with other sort of scientific research that's been done, although there was some inkling that the magnesium and the iron were a bit higher on the herbal as well. So just quickly looking at some silage analysis, and again, just a bit of a health warning with this. This was based on this was a 2-cut system, so they were cutting slightly later, going more for bulk. So neither the herbal ley or the ryegrass are exactly rocket fuel in terms of the ME. Neither was it particularly well wilted. but you can just see again the dry matter a bit higher, particularly on the second cut for the ryegrass. And it's quite well known that herbal leys, they are quite hard to wilt generally. The ME is broadly comparable. Crude protein a bit higher on both first and second cut on the herbal ley. And again, similar thing with the calcium, copper and zinc. Again, just very quick point about the analysis side of things. The near-infrared is obviously calibrated against perennial ryegrass, so herbal leys behave differently when you shine light through them. So if you want more accurate readings of these diverse swards, then wet chemistry, sort of dissolving things in acids, is the way to go. And you can just see on crude protein there that the infrared does tend to undersell the herbal ley compared to the more accurate wet chemistry. So you're better off with the wet chemistry if you want a more accurate analysis on these diverse swards. So just a few sort of, I guess, perhaps more anecdotal points of feedback from the farmers, things people tell us. So everyone says that the stock do seem to like them, and often we get reports that where the gates are left open so they can get in the ryegrass fields or get on the herbal leys, they'll tend to be more on the herbal leys than on the ryegrass. Chicory, as we've heard, is a bit of an acquired taste. Dairy cows can, be a bit sniffy about it. Lambs do finish well and pretty clean as well. No one's reported yet any particular drop in either milk yields or solids, but I've got to admit it's only being done at quite a small scale within these systems, so perhaps too small a scale to pick that up in any case just yet. Rotational grazing has been said already today. That's very important to maintain the diversity in these swards. Not so much of a mindset change for dairy farmers, but we need to keep reminding people locally that this does include sheep as well, because the sheep will just home in on the things that they like and just graze them to death. And then just really posing the question that, are we better with these multi-species swards, going on a slightly longer grazing rotation, going in at slightly higher covers, leaving slightly longer residuals just to maintain that diversity longer? So, I'm not saying this is or isn't the case. I'm just saying, is there a trade-off between sort of short-term dry matter production and longer-term resilience of that sward? Just something to think about, I guess. So site selection, Andres talked all about all of this earlier, so I'm not going to repeat the agricultural side other than just, the good P&K indices, pH, low perennial weed burden, very important. I'd say ideally if you've got some land coming out of arable that's nice and clean, that's a good place to start. Environmental considerations I've got to mention being who I am and who I work for, particularly in the Peak District. We need to be mindful avoiding sensitive sites, so don't put these things on, species-rich grasslands such as you see in the bottom picture there, or on archaeological features, that kind of thing. All of that stuff's covered by the environmental impact regulations. So the SFI scheme does point you towards what it considers to be suitable, improved permanent grassland for putting these things on. And surprise, surprise, that tends to be the ryegrass, white clover dominated land, as in the top right-hand photo there. So we've done quite a lot around establishment of these things locally, I guess, so I'll just say a bit about that. Going back to 2019, the first ones that people put in locally, we followed the, I guess, fairly standard sort of advice: full ploughed seed bed, work it down, fine, firm, sow shallow, roll it well, good seed soil contact, as Andre was saying. Great advice, works really well, good establishment. However, obviously you are upending all of that soil profile, and there are these arguments depending upon where you sit on it, but obviously carbon is an issue. Also on the dairy side, we know that there are a lot of dock and thistle seeds lurking there, just waiting for their day in the sun, literally. So you can start off with something like that on the left and very quickly end up with something like that on the right, full of docks. And then there's not a great deal you can do to control them thereafter. So for all those reasons, quite early on, we started looking at overseeding and min-till type approaches. This was a trial we did in a field up near Buxton. So all in one field, we had several different establishment methods, full ploughed seedbed at one end, and then in the middle we went straight in to the surface with a power harrow, and then at the left-hand side of the field, we just went over multiple times with a Opico-type comb harrow just to try and scratch up surface tilth. We did all of those with and without prior use of glyphosate. Sorry, we did half of each of those methods with glyphosate, half without, is what I meant to say. And then the dark area in the centre of this photo, so between the two sets of red lines, so all of that area had glyphosate, but from the left-hand side of the blue line, right the way up into the field wall, which is just out of shot, all of that area was scratched up with the comb harrow, but then only the dark green sort of half had the glyphosate. Similar to the right-hand side of the blue line, so the inside part had the glyphosate, the other part hadn't. All of that area had been power harrowed. So you can see the difference the glyphosate makes in terms of just taking out that competition from the grasses in the previous sward, and it's pretty night and day, really. Having seen that, one of our other farmers looked at that and thought, well, I really like that power harrow method, and he's adopted that, and it works quite neatly for him. What he tends to do, just before second cut silage, he'll go in glyphosate the standing crop, leave it a week, mow it tight, take the crop off. He's left with a really nice, tight, dead stubble. He'll go over with a power harrow, combi drill just set to just drizzle the seed on, and then he'll really, really roll it well. He doesn't roll it before drilling it, maybe he should do, but so far so good. He's getting good results with that. Just worth pointing out, he does run cereals through this land, so it's relatively clean in terms of weeds, so that he can get away with that, others might not. And for that sort of reason, quite a few people are successfully direct drilling these things in. Again, with the use of glyphosate, just to take out that competition. And Rusty's method for doing this, I'm quite a fan of. I think it's pretty neat. He lets the grass grow up in May, gets a good sort of grass cover, all those dock leaves, well, not saying he's got lots of docks, but any docks that are in there, the leaves are out. That gets glyphosated off and then left for a week and then grazed really hard, grazed down tight, and then he goes in, direct drills that in, often uses just a bit of lime just to counteract any acidity from the decaying sward there, and that works very well. In other cases, some people just spray off and then leave it, a week or two, drill after that. But this system's really good. I'm not going to just show you all the good stuff. We've got people who've done this and it's gone wrong, and I'll admit to that. This one was done late last summer. They sprayed that off, left it a couple of weeks, direct drilled it, and then that photo on the left was taken just a few weeks back, and as you can see, that has failed. Not 100% sure why, no obvious sign of any pests when you have a sort of dig around. It was good P and Ks, good pH, so whether it was just a lack of a bit of lime at the time, perhaps we'll never know. It just shows, there are pitfalls. So for these sorts of reasons, quite a few people are using some break crops before they're putting their herbal leys in now. We've got a couple of dairy farmers who are direct drilling in brassicas, sort of late April time, with a view to having another sort of forage crop, a brassica crop in July to graze off, then dealing with any weeds afterwards, and then direct drilling in the herbal ley after that. Likewise, you can go in, put in some stubble turnips or something, graze with sheep over the winter, direct drill your herbal ley in the spring. A few people doing that. If you've got arable, bit of whole crop maybe in your system, just putting a cereal in for the summer, having hit on your weeds, then just direct drilling into the stubble. That works quite well. Or perhaps if it's a second cereal, undersowing the herbal ley. We've got a few people doing that. Another quite a nice little approach is the use of Westerwald or Italian ryegrass as a lead-in to the herbal ley. And this particular site is up at Hartington, which is well over 1,000 feet above sea level. He's only got a couple of inches of soil, so can't really plough. Wanted to put in the herbal ley, but quite a few docks and wasn't quite confident enough to go straight in. So what he decided to do, and this was late October, not last year, the year before, direct drilled in a Westerwolds, which came up really well over the winter. Then had 2 strikes on the weeds last summer. And at the moment, we're hoping there'll be enough life left in the Westerwolds to get a cut off it this spring. And then hopefully we can just direct drill in the herbal ley into quite a nice open base there, having dealt with the weeds. The other neat thing about this is that he got 5 cuts off that Westerwolds, which he was chuffed to bits with. He's got a nice big stack of bales in the yard, and it's just a nice little, I guess you could think of it as like a forage buffer, an insurance, if that following herbal ley is a bit slower, as they tend to be, to establish. So it's quite a neat little method. Conscious that talking a lot about cultivation and glyphosate and all these things, they are just tools to do a job. That's not to say we aren't continually looking for ways of doing this without either, to try and do the bare minimum. I think the closest that we are likely to get is the use of this sort of, well, this was an Aitchison grassland drill. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this, it's a tine-based grassland drill. And we thought this was the best bet, really, for going in without the glyphosate, because it's quite severe, as you can see. And it's just sort of pushing that sward back and giving a bit of a fighting chance for those seedlings. And the photo on the right there just shows you that was establishment of those new seedlings 6 weeks after drilling. However, because of the weather last summer, this cut was quite delayed. It was quite late on. And so although we did get the germination, soon after that temperatures dropped and then they just stopped growing. So we won't really know how effective this has been until later this summer. So it's a kind of a watch this space, really. So talked a lot about controlling weeds before the herbal leys go in. However, if you do end up still with an issue, needn't be the end of the world, because there's some interesting technology under development. This is a trial that Corteva Agriscience are doing on a few of our local herbal leys, and essentially this retrofits a boom sprayer into a spot sprayer. So the cameras mounted on the booms scan the sward 80 centimetres ahead, identify the target weed species, in this case broadleaf dock, and they just turn the nozzles on and off, deliver a targeted pulse just where you need it, so saving on chemical. He was just putting water through at this time, which is why I was so close. But if you homed in on the docks afterwards, you could see the leaves glistening with the water, and there was relatively little kind of splashback, around on the other species. So it's an interesting one to watch. Not quite there yet, but an interesting one to keep your eye on. Also worth mentioning that there will be payments for this kind of smart weed control under the New Look SFI scheme later on this year. So just very quick slide about persistence. So we know that things like chicory, after about 3 years in, is on the wane. Some of the red clovers as well. And then you possibly have the extra cost of having to reseed the whole thing after sort of 4 or 5 years. So anything you can do to keep them diverse and productive for as long as possible, the better. We've done a few trials with putting a mix through a slurry tanker. That's shown some promise, shallow injecting into an open sward. The plantain and the white clovers and the burnet have done pretty well. Another option might be to let the herbal ley grow up, flower, set seed, and use it as standing hay for dry cows and just give the sward a bit of a lift. So where's all this going? Well, the best example we've got, or I suppose the only example of a whole farm system in the White Peak is Barkerfield's farm. There used to be dairy until 12 years ago. They were all sort of bag nitrogen and slurry. They then went into beef. They were looking for opportunities to cut costs. Nitrogen fertilizer seemed an obvious one. So they put in some red clover leys. They liked how they went, got a bit more ambitious, put in some herbal leys, and then never really looked back. So their system now is based around 4 or 5 years of herbal ley. They then go into a cereal, which they use for whole crop, and they might have 1 year or they might have 2 years of cereal. And just depending upon what the season's doing, if they're looking like being short of forage, they'll whole crop that cereal. If not, they'll crimp the grain. So quite a resilient system. And they do as much of this by min-till or direct drilling as possible. So very briefly then, last 2 slides, just saying a little bit about the payment schemes available. So in all the time I've been working on the agri-environment schemes, which is sort of over 20 years now, I've got to say there's never been so many good options available in these schemes as there are now, particularly for productive farming. So if you haven't already looked at the SFI, well worth a look, particularly given all the new options that are on the way later this year. And the sort of system I've just described at Barkerfield's farm, an example of the payments that might attract. If you essentially think of splitting the land into 3 blocks, A, B, and C, a third of it might be in the AB7 whole crop cereal, which is pushing £600 a hectare, 2/3 into herbal ley, and then you just rotate the whole crop around with the herbal ley. That payment averages out at £453 a hectare. If you then add in nitrogen fertiliser savings, you could be into some really attractive money. So it's quite easy to look at that and sort of say, well, actually, yeah, that is good. We'd have a go at that. And tempting just to kind of put the whole farm in, the herbal leys, whole crop, etc., maybe in year 1. Couple of downsides to that. If you're arguably trying to sort of establish these things properly, there's a limit to the amount of land you can reseed, obviously, without leaving yourself short of forage. Also, if you plough that up and not dealt with the weeds properly, you could end up with a real weed problem. On the other hand, if you just decided to rattle around with some chain harrows and scatter a bit of seed around, that's unlikely to deliver you a proper herbal ley stroke multi-species sward that will deliver all the benefits that are advertised. So it's just worth thinking about how you would use SFI as a tool to help transition a system across in a kind of a sustainable and practical way without getting into difficulties. So this is my last slide, Steve, if that's all right. So this is not a one-size-fits-all. This is just an example I've come up with of how you might think about how to use SFI. So if you imagine the farm split into 6 blocks down the left-hand side, it might be that two of those blocks, relatively clean land, perhaps ex-arable. You could pop that straight into the SAM3, which is a herbal ley option. You might have a bit of grassland that's a bit compacted and got some dock problems. You could pop that into the IGL2 option, so put it in some Italian ryegrass, deal with the compaction, deal with the weeds. If you let that go to seed for winter bird food, there is a payment of £515 a hectare for that, so that in itself is quite attractive. Another block into the AB7 whole crop, and then it might be that some of the land around the farm, calving paddocks, that kind of thing, got some clover in, so just drop that into the NUM2 legume only option. And you can see by the time you get to the end of year 3, year 4, you're stepping in the herbal leys after the cereals. So I just encourage you to look at SFI and think about how you could use that to transition in this kind of system, if, of course, that's what you want to do, and it may not be. So, sorry, Steve, if I've overrun. Thank you very much for listening. If anyone wanted to come up to the Peak District and meet some of the farmers who are actually doing this stuff on the ground, there are summer farm walk dates. Please feel free to scan the QR code and you'll be very welcome to come along.